The ancient oak doors of Ravenshire Palace had witnessed countless secrets, but none as dangerous as the ones hidden in the locked filing cabinet of Princess Isabella's private study. When Queen Consort Helena's perfectly manicured fingers traced the edges of those forbidden documents at 3 in the morning, she had no idea that her discovery would shatter the very foundation of the Valdorian monarchy. The files contained evidence that would either destroy the royal family or save it from a scandal that had been brewing for 25 years. But as the palace security cameras captured her silhouette against the moonlit window, one thing became certain. By sunrise, nothing in the kingdom of Valdoria would ever be the same. The morning mist clung to the gardens of Ravenshire Palace like a shroud, concealing the turmoil that had erupted within its ancient walls. Queen Consort Hela Montclair stood at the towering windows of the blue drawing room, her reflection ghostly against the glass as she watched the groundskeepers tend to the rose bushes below. Her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of a sleepless night. Her platinum blonde hair slightly disheveled, her emerald green eyes rimmed with exhaustion, and her hands trembling almost imperceptibly as she clutched a crystal tumbler of untouched morning tea. The events of the previous evening replayed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. She had entered Princess Isabella's study with innocent intentions, searching for the charity gala guest list that Isabella had promised to review. The princess had been away on a diplomatic mission to the neighboring kingdom of Astoria for 3 weeks, and Helena needed the list to finalize the seating arrangements for the upcoming Children's Hospital fundraiser. What she discovered instead would haunt her forever. The mahogany filing cabinet in the corner of Isabella's study had been left slightly ajar, something that would have gone unnoticed by most people. But Helena's keen eye for detail, a trait that had served her well during her 15 years as queen consort, immediately spotted the anomaly. Isabella was meticulous about security, especially regarding her private correspondence and official documents. The sight of the unlocked cabinet was so unusual that Helena felt compelled to investigate. Inside the cabinet, beneath layers of diplomatic correspondence and charity documentation, Helena's fingers had found a manila envelope marked with a red seal, the kind used for the most sensitive royal documents. Her heart had begun to race as she recognized the seal as one belonging to the late King Edmund, her husband, King Charles's father, who had died 25 years ago. The envelope was thick, heavy with the weight of whatever secrets it contained. With shaking hands, Helena had opened the envelope to find a collection of documents that made her blood run cold. Birth certificates, medical records, DNA test results, and a handwritten letter in King Edmund's distinctive script, all pointing to a truth so devastating that it threatened to bring down the monarchy itself. The documents revealed that Princess Isabella, the beloved heir to the throne and the people's darling, was not King Charles's biological daughter. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. Isabella's biological father was revealed to be Lord Marcus Ashworth, the former royal equerry who had served the royal family for decades and had been like an uncle to Isabella throughout her childhood. The affair between Queen Margaret, Charles's first wife who had died in a riding accident when Isabella was 10, and Lord Ashworth had been carefully concealed for 32 years. Only King Edmund had known the truth, and he had taken extraordinary measures to protect the secret. Helena's discovery was made more shocking by the realization that Lord Ashworth was still alive and living quietly in the countryside, unaware that his daughter was about to inherit the throne. The implications were staggering. If this information became public, it would not only delegitimize Isabella's claim to the crown, but would also raise questions about the integrity of the entire royal lineage. As Helena sat in the study, surrounded by the damning evidence, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Her heart hammered against her chest as she quickly gathered the documents and stuffed them back into the envelope. The footsteps paused outside the door, and Helena held her breath, praying that whoever was in the hallway would continue on their way. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps resumed, growing fainter as they moved away from the study. But Helena's relief was short-lived. As she prepared to leave the study, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The red light of a security camera in the corner of the room was blinking steadily, indicating that it was recording. She realized with growing horror that her entire discovery had been captured on film. Every moment, every document she had examined, every shocked expression that had crossed her face, all of it was now stored in the palace's security system. The head of palace security, Colonel James Winters, was known for his unwavering loyalty to the crown, but he was also a stickler for protocol. Helena knew that he reviewed the security footage every morning as part of his routine, and it would only be a matter of hours before he discovered what she had done. She also knew that Colonel Winters reported directly to King Charles on all matters of palace security, which meant that her husband would soon learn of her unauthorized access to Isabella's private files. Alina spent the rest of the night pacing her private chambers, weighing her options. She could confess to Charles immediately and face his anger, but she feared that he might not be emotionally prepared for such devastating news about his beloved daughter. She could try to speak with Colonel Winters privately and attempt to convince him to delete the footage, but that would require her to reveal why she needed the evidence suppressed, which would inevitably lead to the same outcome. The most troubling aspect of her dilemma was her genuine love and concern for Isabella. The princess had been like a daughter to Helena, who had never been able to have children of her own. Isabella's warmth, intelligence, and dedication to her royal duties had earned Helena's deep respect and affection over the years. The thought of being responsible for destroying Isabella's world filled Helena with anguish. As dawn broke over the palace grounds, Helena made a decision that she hoped she wouldn't regret. She would speak with King Charles before Colonel Winters had a chance to review the security footage. She would tell her husband the truth about what she had discovered and let him decide how to handle the situation. It was a risk. Charles's temper was legendary, and his protective instincts regarding Isabella were fierce, but Helena believed it was the only honorable course of action. The knock on her chamber door came earlier than expected. Helena's personal secretary, Mrs. Adelaide Thornbury, entered with her usual morning briefing, but her expression was unusually grave. Mrs. Thornbury had served the royal family for over 20 years and had an uncanny ability to sense when something was amiss in the palace. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Thornbury said carefully, "Colonel Winters has requested an immediate audience with you. He mentioned that it concerns a matter of security that requires urgent attention." Helena felt the color drain from her face. She had hoped to reach Charles first, but it seemed that Colonel Winters had already begun his morning review of the security footage. There was no escape now. The secret was about to be exposed, and Helena would be at the center of the storm that followed. "Tell Colonel Winters that I'll see him in the blue drawing room in 10 minutes, Helena replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And, Mrs. Thornbury, please ask His Majesty to join us. This is a matter that will require his immediate attention." As Mrs. Thornbury left to deliver the messages, Helena took one last look at her reflection in the mirror. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared to face the consequences of her discovery. Whatever happened next would determine not only her own fate, but the future of the Valdorian monarchy itself. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the palace grounds as Helena made her way to the blue drawing room. She could hear the distant sound of the palace staff beginning their daily routines, blissfully unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. In just a few minutes, the carefully maintained facade of royal perfection would begin to crumble, and Helena would be the one responsible for striking the first blow. As she reached for the ornate door handle of the blue drawing room, Helena whispered a silent prayer for strength and wisdom. The next few hours would test every skill she had acquired during her years as queen consort, and she would need all the grace and diplomacy she could muster to navigate the treacherous waters that lay ahead. The blue drawing room had been the scene of countless royal conferences throughout its 300-year history, but none as potentially catastrophic as the one about to unfold. Helena positioned herself near the fireplace, using the ornate mantelpiece for support as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. The room's powder blue walls, adorned with portraits of long-dead monarchs, seemed to close in around her as she waited for the arrival of Colonel Winters and King Charles. Colonel James Winters entered first, his military bearing as rigid as always despite his 62 years. His steel-gray hair was perfectly groomed, his uniform immaculate, and his expression unreadable. Behind him walked King Charles, whose presence immediately filled the room with an aura of authority and barely contained energy. At 55, Charles retained the athletic build of his youth, though his dark hair was now streaked with silver at the temples. His piercing blue eyes, so similar to Isabella's, swept the room before settling on Helena with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Colonel Winters mentioned this was urgent, Charles said without preamble, his deep voice carrying the weight of generations of royal authority. What exactly is this about? Colonel Winters stepped forward, his posture even straighter than usual. Your Majesty, during my routine review of the security footage from last evening, I discovered something that requires immediate attention. He paused, glancing at Helena before continuing. At approximately 3:17 a.m., Her Majesty the Queen Consort was observed accessing Princess Isabella's private study and examining classified documents from a secured filing cabinet. The silence that followed was deafening. Helena watched as Charles's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching fury. His jaw clenched, and she could see the muscle in his cheek twitching, a sign she had learned to recognize over their 15 years of marriage as a warning of an approaching storm. Helena, Charles said, his voice dangerously quiet. Is this true? Helena lifted her chin, drawing on every ounce of dignity she possessed. Yes, Charles, it is true. But before you pass judgment, you need to understand what I found. What you found? Charles's voice rose slightly, his control beginning to slip. You violated Isabella's privacy, accessed classified documents without authorization, and you want to discuss what you found? Colonel Winters cleared his throat diplomatically. Your Majesty, perhaps it would be prudent to hear Her Majesty's explanation before deciding on a course of action. Charles turned his fierce gaze on the colonel, but Winters held his ground with the steady composure of a man who had served in 3 military campaigns before joining the royal household. After a moment, Charles nodded curtly and returned his attention to Helena. Speak, he commanded. Helena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything. Charles, what I found concerns Isabella's parentage. There are documents, DNA tests, birth records, correspondence, that suggest Isabella may not be your biological daughter. The effect of her words was immediate and devastating. Charles staggered backward, as if he had been physically struck, his face draining of all color. He reached for the nearest chair, gripping its back with white knuckles as he struggled to process what Helena had just told him. That's impossible, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Isabella is my daughter. She has my eyes, my temperament. She has your mother's eyes, Helena interrupted gently. Queen Victoria's eyes were the same shade of blue, which is why the resemblance seemed so strong. But Charles, the documents are signed by your father. King Edmund knew the truth. Colonel Winters stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, perhaps it would be advisable to examine these documents privately before making any decisions about their authenticity. Charles looked up sharply. You've seen them? No, Your Majesty, Winters replied. But I've served this family for 25 years. If such documents exist and bear your father's signature, they deserve serious consideration. Helena moved toward Charles, her heart breaking at the sight of his anguish. Charles, I know this is devastating. Believe me, I've spent the entire night grappling with this information. But we need to decide how to handle it before what? Charles's voice was raw with emotion. Before my daughter, the woman I've raised, loved, and prepared to inherit the throne, discovers that her entire life has been built on a lie? The weight of the situation seemed to settle on all three of them simultaneously. Isabella was currently in Astoria, conducting delicate diplomatic negotiations that could affect trade relations between the two kingdoms for decades to come. She was scheduled to return in 3 days, expecting to resume her royal duties and continue her preparation for eventual succession to the throne. The knowledge that her legitimacy could be questioned would not only devastate her personally, but could also undermine her diplomatic efforts and damage the monarchy's reputation internationally. Who else knows about this? Charles asked, his royal training beginning to assert itself over his emotional turmoil. Based on the documents, only your father knew the complete truth during his lifetime, Helena replied. Lord Ashworth appears to be unaware of Isabella's true parentage. The medical staff who conducted the DNA testing are long deceased. As far as I can determine, we three are the only living people who know. Colonel Winters nodded in agreement. I've conducted a preliminary review of personnel records from that time period. The staff members who would have been privy to such sensitive information have all either passed away or left royal service decades ago. Charles began to pace the length of the room, his mind clearly racing through the implications and potential courses of action. Helena had seen him in this mode before during various political crises, his analytical mind working through problems with the precision and thoroughness that had made him an effective monarch. The documents, where are they now? He asked. Still in Isabella's study, Helena admitted. I returned everything to the envelope and placed it back in the filing cabinet exactly as I found it. And the security footage? Colonel Winters answered immediately. I've isolated the relevant footage and transferred it to a secured drive. No one else has access to it, and it hasn't been integrated into the standard security archive. Charles stopped pacing and fixed both of them with his intense gaze. This information cannot leave this room. Not yet. Not until we've had time to verify its authenticity and determine the best course of action. Helena felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had feared that Charles might react with such anger that he would make rash decisions in the heat of the moment. Instead, he was demonstrating the same careful judgment that had served the kingdom well during his reign. There's something else, Helena said hesitantly. The documents suggest that Lord Ashworth is still alive. He's been living quietly in the Lake District for the past 15 years. If Isabella truly is his daughter, he has a right to know. And she has a right to know who her real father is. Charles's expression darkened. Lord Ashworth served this family faithfully for decades. If he was involved with Margaret, it may have been as much her initiative as his. Margaret was... He paused, struggling with memories that were clearly still painful after 22 years. She was impulsive, passionate. The riding accident that killed her wasn't entirely unexpected. She took risks that terrified everyone around her. Colonel Winters spoke carefully. Your Majesty, if I may suggest, perhaps our first priority should be to secure these documents and conduct our own verification of their authenticity. The DNA testing methods available 30 years ago were not as sophisticated as current techniques. We could arrange for independent testing that would either confirm or refute these claims. Charles nodded slowly. That's sound advice. But who could we trust with such sensitive testing? Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell at the Royal Medical College has the highest security clearance and has conducted confidential testing for the royal family before, Winters suggested. She was instrumental in the paternity verification during Prince Alexander's succession dispute 5 years ago. Helena remembered Dr. Hartwell, a brilliant geneticist whose discretion was legendary and whose loyalty to the crown was unquestioned. If anyone could handle such delicate testing, it would be her. Very well, Charles decided. Colonel Winters, I want you to personally retrieve those documents from Isabella's study. Use whatever excuse is necessary, but ensure that no one else sees them. Then arrange for a private meeting with Dr. Hartwell. Helena and I will provide DNA samples, and will test them against samples from Isabella's medical records. Helena felt a chill run down her spine. Charles, what if the tests confirm what the documents claim? Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the gardens where Isabella had played as a child, where she had learned to ride horses, where she had hosted her first formal garden party at age 16. The weight of potentially losing not just a daughter but an heir to the throne was written across his features. Then we'll face that reality when it comes, he said finally. But until we know for certain, Isabella remains my daughter, the Princess of Valdoria, and the heir to this throne. Is that understood? Both Helena and Colonel Winters nodded their agreement. And Helena, Charles added, his voice softening slightly, I understand why you opened that cabinet. Your instincts have served this family well over the years. But from this moment forward, this matter is to be handled with absolute secrecy. Not even Mrs. Thornberry can know. As Colonel Winters prepared to leave and begin his delicate mission, Helena approached Charles. Despite everything that had happened, she could see the man she had fallen in love with beneath the weight of royal responsibility and personal anguish. Charles, she said softly, regardless of what we discover, Isabella has been raised with love, honor, and the finest education. She's become exactly the kind of person this kingdom needs as its future monarch. Nothing can change that. Charles looked at her with eyes that held both gratitude and deep sorrow. I pray you're right, Helena. Because if we're about to lose our daughter, the kingdom may be losing its future as well. 3 days passed in excruciating suspense, as the palace operated under a carefully maintained veneer of normalcy. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell had agreed to conduct the emergency DNA analysis personally, working from her private laboratory to ensure absolute confidentiality. Helena found herself unable to eat, sleep, or concentrate on her usual duties, while Charles threw himself into his royal responsibilities with an intensity that bordered on obsession, as if staying busy could somehow prevent the inevitable revelation. Colonel Winters had successfully retrieved the documents from Isabella's study under the pretext of conducting a routine security sweep of all royal offices. The manila envelope now sat in the royal safe, its contents having been photographed and digitized for Dr. Jeffa. Hartwell's analysis. The original DNA testing from 30 years ago had been conducted by the late Dr. Gerald Morrison, who had been King Edmund's personal physician and had died of a heart attack 12 years ago, taking any first-hand knowledge of the testing procedures with him to the grave. The call came at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a gray Thursday afternoon. Helena was in her private sitting room attempting to review invitations for upcoming state functions when Mrs. Thornbury announced that Dr. Hartwell was requesting an immediate private audience with their majesties. The formal tone of the request told Helena everything she needed to know about the results before a single word was spoken. Within 10 minutes, Helena and Charles were seated in the king's private study, a room so secure that even the most sophisticated listening devices couldn't penetrate its specially designed walls. Hartwell entered carrying a leather briefcase, her usually warm demeanor replaced by the grave expression of someone bearing terrible news. At 61, Dr. Hartwell had silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her reputation for discretion was matched only by her reputation for absolute honesty, regardless of how painful that honesty might be. Your Majesties, Dr. Hartwell began without preamble. I've completed the comprehensive DNA analysis using samples from both of you, as well as archived samples from Princess Isabella's medical records. She opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder containing charts, graphs, and detailed scientific reports. I'm afraid the results confirm the authenticity of the documents you asked me to verify. The words hit Helena like a physical blow, even though she had been preparing herself for this possibility for 3 days. Beside her, Charles seemed to age 10 years in an instant, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the confirmation. You're absolutely certain? Charles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hartwell nodded gravely. The DNA evidence is irrefutable, Your Majesty. Princess Isabella shares no paternal genetic markers with you. However, the analysis does confirm her maternal connection to the late Queen Margaret, and the paternal markers match the profile we established for Lord Marcus Ashworth, based on samples obtained from his previous medical examinations. Charles stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to both women as he struggled to compose himself. Helena could see his reflection in the glass and was heartbroken by the devastation written across his features. The original testing conducted 30 years ago was remarkably accurate for its time, Dr. Hartwell continued. King Edmund's physician clearly understood the implications of what he had discovered. The documentation suggests that he recommended absolute secrecy to protect both Princess Isabella and the integrity of the succession. Helena found her voice. Dr. Hartwell, what are our options now? Legally, I mean. What does this discovery mean for Isabella's position as heir to the throne? Dr. Hartwell exchanged a meaningful look with both monarchs. That's beyond my area of expertise, Your Majesty. However, I can tell you that from a purely biological standpoint, Princess Isabella is a healthy, normal young woman who happens to have been raised believing she was someone else's daughter. The question of legal succession would need to be addressed by constitutional experts. Charles turned from the window, his royal training finally reasserting itself over his personal anguish. Dr. Hartwell, I need your word that this information will remain absolutely confidential. No copies of your analysis, no written records beyond what you've presented to us today. Of course, Your Majesty. Dr. Hartwell replied immediately. I've destroyed all working materials, and my laboratory has been thoroughly cleaned of any trace evidence. The only existing documentation is what I've brought to you today. After Dr. Hartwell departed, Helena and Charles sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. The enormity of their situation seemed to grow larger with each passing minute, and Helena could see Charles wrestling with implications that went far beyond their personal family dynamic. "We need to consult Lord Chancellor Pemberton," Charles said finally. "He's the only person qualified to advise us on the constitutional implications of this discovery." Lord Chancellor Edward Pemberton was the kingdom's most senior legal advisor, a man whose discretion was legendary and whose knowledge of constitutional law was unparalleled. At 73, he had served under 3 monarchs and had guided the royal family through numerous legal crises over his 4-decade career. If anyone could provide guidance on such a delicate matter, it would be him. Helena felt a knot of dread forming in her stomach. "Charles, if we involve Lord Pemberton, we're expanding the circle of people who know. Each person we tell increases the risk of this information becoming public. The alternative is to make critical decisions based on incomplete understanding of the legal ramifications," Charles replied. "Pemberton has kept royal secrets for 40 years. We can trust him." The meeting with Lord Pemberton was arranged for the following evening, giving Charles and Helena one more sleepless night to contemplate their impossible situation. Helena spent the hours alternating between worry about Isabella's emotional well-being and concern about the potential political chaos that could result from a succession crisis. Charles, meanwhile, seemed to be retreating into himself, speaking only when directly addressed and spending long hours in solitary contemplation. Lord Pemberton arrived at precisely 8 o'clock. His tall, austere frame draped in his customary dark suit. His white hair was perfectly groomed despite his age, and his sharp green eyes missed nothing as he entered the king's study. Helena had always found him slightly intimidating. His brilliant legal mind was combined with an ability to ask the difficult questions that others avoided. "Your Majesties," Pemberton said after taking his seat. "Colonel Winters briefed me on the general nature of this consultation, though he was appropriately vague about the specifics. I understand this concerns a matter of succession law." Charles handed him the complete file, the original documents found by Helena, Hartwell's scientific analysis, and a summary of the timeline of events. Pemberton read everything with the careful attention of a man who understood that every word could have profound legal implications. His expression remained neutral throughout, though Helena noticed his eyebrows raise slightly when he reached Dr. Hartwell's conclusions. "This is indeed a matter of extraordinary complexity," Pemberton said after completing his review. "From a strictly legal standpoint, the situation is unprecedented in the modern history of the Valdorian monarchy." Helena leaned forward. "What exactly does that mean for Isabella's position?" Pemberton removed his reading glasses and cleaned them carefully, a gesture Helena recognized as his way of buying time to formulate a precise response. "The law of succession in Valdoria is based on legitimate bloodline descent from previous monarchs. Princess Isabella's claim to the throne rests entirely on her status as King Charles's biological daughter." Charles's voice was steady but hollow. "And since she's not my biological daughter?" "Technically, Your Majesty, her claim to succession would be invalidated," Pemberton replied with characteristic directness. "However, there are several mitigating factors that complicate this conclusion." Helena felt her heart sink, even as she clung to hope that the complications Pemberton mentioned might provide a solution. "The first factor," Pemberton continued, "is that Princess Isabella was acknowledged as legitimate heir from the moment of her birth. King Edmund's decision to conceal the paternity results means that she has lived her entire life as the legal heir, conducting official duties and representing the crown in that capacity." Charles nodded slowly. "And the second factor?" "The doctrine of estoppel," Pemberton explained. "The crown cannot easily reverse a recognition that has stood unchallenged for 32 years, particularly when that reversal would be based on information that was deliberately concealed by the previous monarch." Helena felt a flicker of hope. "Does that mean Isabella's position is secure?" Pemberton's expression grew more grave. "I'm afraid not, Your Majesty. While these factors would complicate any legal challenge, they wouldn't necessarily prevent one. If this information became public, Parliament would likely demand a formal review of the succession. The political pressure alone could force abdication." The three of them sat in heavy silence as the implications sank in. Isabella's entire life, her education, her training, her sense of identity, her future, was built on a foundation that could crumble if the truth ever emerged. "There's another consideration," Pemberton added carefully. Lord Ashworth's potential claim. If he is indeed Princess Isabella's biological father, and if he chose to press a claim of legitimacy, the legal situation would become even more complex. Charles looked up sharply. What kind of claim? It's highly unlikely, but theoretically Lord Ashworth could argue that his daughter was deliberately denied her true heritage and that he, as her biological father, should have some say in her future. It would be a weak argument legally, but it could generate significant public sympathy and media attention. Helena felt the walls closing in around them. Every option seemed to lead to scandal, heartbreak, or constitutional crisis, and often all three. What would you recommend? Charles asked. Lord Pemberton was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the various possibilities. Your Majesty, this may be one of those rare situations where the truth, while important, could cause more harm than good. Princess Isabella has been an exemplary heir. She's intelligent, dedicated, and beloved by the people. The kingdom has never been more stable or prosperous. Charles leaned forward. You're suggesting we conceal this information permanently? I'm suggesting that you consider very carefully whether revealing this information serves any beneficial purpose, Pemberton replied. The original DNA testing was ordered by King Edmund, presumably to determine how to handle the situation. His decision to conceal the results suggests that he concluded revelation would be more harmful than secrecy. Helena felt torn between relief that concealment might be possible and guilt about continuing such a massive deception. But what about Isabella's right to know who her real father is? What about Lord Ashworth's right to know he has a daughter? Pemberton's expression softened slightly. Those are moral and ethical questions, Your Majesty, not legal ones. They're also questions that only you, as Isabella's parents in every meaningful sense, can answer. As the meeting concluded and Lord Pemberton prepared to leave, he offered one final piece of advice. Your Majesties, whatever you decide, you should know that time is not your ally in this matter. Princess Isabella returns tomorrow, and secrets of this magnitude have a way of revealing themselves at the most inopportune moments. If you choose concealment, you must be prepared for the possibility of eventual discovery. If you choose revelation, you must be prepared for the immediate consequences. After Pemberton's departure, Helena and Charles were left alone with the most difficult decision of their lives. In less than 18 hours, Isabella would return to the palace, expecting to resume her normal routine. The choice they made in the next few hours would determine not only their daughter's fate, but the future of the monarchy itself. Princess Isabella Valdoria returned to Ravenshire Palace at precisely 11:30 a.m. on a crisp Friday morning, her diplomatic mission to Astoria having concluded successfully with a new trade agreement that would benefit both kingdoms for decades to come. Helena watched from her sitting room window as the royal motorcade wound its way up the palace drive, her heart heavy with the knowledge that Isabella's homecoming was about to become the most difficult day of the young woman's life. At 29, Isabella possessed an elegant beauty that combined the best features of her supposed royal lineage. Her thick chestnut brown hair was pulled back in a sophisticated chignon, and her blue eyes, so remarkably similar to Charles's that the resemblance had never been questioned, sparkled with the satisfaction of a successful diplomatic mission. She wore a tailored navy blue suit that enhanced her tall, graceful frame, and she moved with the confident bearing of someone born to leadership. Elena had spent a sleepless night after she and Charles made their final decision. They would tell Isabella the truth. Not immediately. The princess deserved at least one normal day to recover from her travels and brief the king on her diplomatic success. But within 48 hours, they would sit down with their daughter and reveal the devastating secret that King Edmund had carried to his grave. The decision had not come easily. Charles had argued passionately for continued concealment, pointing out that Isabella was happy, successful, and completely prepared for her future role as queen. Helena, however, had ultimately convinced him that the moral imperative of honesty outweighed the practical benefits of deception. Isabella deserved to know the truth about her parentage, and Lord Ashworth deserved to know that he had a daughter who had grown into a remarkable young woman. Isabella's first official duty upon her return was a private briefing with King Charles about the Astorian negotiations. Helena wasn't present for that meeting, but she could hear the animated conversation through the walls of the adjacent drawing room. Isabella's voice carried the excitement of someone who had successfully navigated complex political waters, while Charles's responses sounded strained and formal, a fact that Isabella seemed not to notice in her enthusiasm. That evening, the royal family gathered for dinner in the small dining room, a tradition they maintained whenever possible to preserve some sense of normal family life despite their official duties. Helena watched Isabella carefully throughout the meal, trying to memorize every expression, every laugh, every gesture, knowing that after tomorrow their relationship might never be the same. Isabella was radiant as she described her meetings with the Astorian royal family and the delicate negotiations that had led to the new trade agreement. Her diplomatic skills had clearly impressed even the notoriously difficult Astorian foreign minister, and several trade barriers that had existed for decades had been successfully eliminated. The Queen of Astoria specifically asked me to convey her personal regards, Isabella told Charles. She mentioned that she's looking forward to the state visit next spring and suggested that we might formalize the cultural exchange program we discussed. Charles nodded approvingly, but Helena could see the tension in his shoulders and the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his wine glass. Isabella, however, remained oblivious to her father's distress, caught up in the satisfaction of her diplomatic triumph. "There's something else," Isabella continued, her excitement barely contained. "Crown Prince Alexander of Astoria has formally requested permission to court me. His proposal was quite romantic, actually. He presented it during a private dinner overlooking the palace gardens." Helena felt her blood turn to ice. A royal courtship between Isabella and Crown Prince Alexander would be significant news throughout both kingdoms, generating months of media attention and public celebration. The timing couldn't be worse. If their secret was going to be revealed, it needed to happen before any formal courtship announcements were made. Charles set down his fork carefully. "And what was your response to this request?" Isabella's smile was radiant. "I told him I would need to discuss it with my family first." "Of course. But Charles, Alexander is everything I could hope for in a potential partner. He's intelligent, kind, completely committed to his royal duties, and we share the same vision for strengthening ties between our kingdoms." Helena exchanged a meaningful look with Charles. They both understood that the implications of Isabella's potential engagement went far beyond personal happiness. Crown Prince Alexander was third in line to the Astorian throne, and a marriage between him and Isabella would create a powerful alliance between the two kingdoms. If Isabella's legitimacy was later questioned, it could create a diplomatic crisis that would affect international relations for generations. "Isabella," Charles said carefully, "I think it would be wise to delay any formal response to Prince Alexander until we've had time to discuss this matter fully." Isabella's expression showed mild confusion but no alarm. "Of course, father. I wasn't planning to give him an answer for several weeks anyway. These things require careful consideration." The remainder of the dinner passed in strained conversation, with Helena and Charles both struggling to maintain their composure while Isabella remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her. When the meal concluded, Isabella kissed both of her parents goodnight and retired to her chambers to catch up on correspondence that had accumulated during her absence. Helena and Charles retreated to the king's private study, where they finalized their plans for the devastating conversation that would take place the following evening. Charles had arranged for Colonel Winters to be present, both as a witness and as someone who could provide security consultation if the revelation led to immediate complications. Lord Pemberton would be available by secure telephone if legal questions arose. "I keep thinking about her expression when she was talking about Alexander," Helena said, pacing the length of the study. "She's so happy, so full of hope for her future." "How do we destroy all of that?" Charles was staring into the fireplace, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. "We don't have a choice anymore, Helena. If she's going to enter into a formal courtship, she needs to know the truth about her parentage. To do otherwise would be to base her entire future on a lie." Helena nodded, though her heart remained heavy. "And Lord Ashworth? When do we contact him?" "After we speak with Isabella," Charles replied. "If she wants to meet her biological father, we'll arrange it. If she doesn't, we'll respect her wishes." The following day passed with agonizing slowness. Isabella spent the morning in meetings with her private secretary, reviewing the diplomatic documents from her Astorian mission and preparing her official report. She had lunch with the palace staff, catching up on local news and palace gossip that had accumulated during her absence. In the afternoon, she reviewed plans for upcoming charitable events and met with the heads of several organizations she patronized. Throughout the day, Helena found excuses to spend time with Isabella, treasuring what might be their last day as mother and daughter in the truest sense. They walked through the palace gardens together, discussing the upcoming renovation of the East Wing. They reviewed guest lists for the autumn charity gala, laughing at some of the more eccentric requests for invitations. They even spent an hour in Isabella's sitting room, looking through photo albums from Isabella's childhood and reminiscing about family vacations and holidays. During these precious hours, Helena was struck by how much Isabella had grown into the perfect royal heir. She was gracious but not servile, intelligent but not condescending, confident but not arrogant. Every quality that made her an ideal future queen had been carefully nurtured and developed over her 29 years. The irony that she might not legally be entitled to inherit the throne was almost unbearable. As evening approached, Helena's anxiety reached nearly unbearable levels. She changed clothes 3 times, unable to settle on appropriate attire for such an unprecedented conversation. What did one wear when destroying their daughter's world? Finally, she settled on a simple black dress, somber enough to reflect the gravity of the situation, but not so formal as to immediately alarm Isabella. Charles appeared at the door of her dressing room at exactly 7 o'clock. He had chosen his military dress uniform, perhaps drawing strength from the formal trappings of his rank and authority. His expression was resolute but pained, and Helena could see that he had been crying, something she had witnessed fewer than half a dozen times in their 15-year marriage. "Are you ready?" he asked, offering Helena his arm. "No," Helena replied honestly. "But I don't think we ever could be ready for something like this." They made their way to the blue drawing room, where Colonel Winters was already waiting with a secure telephone connection to Lord Pemberton. Isabella arrived precisely at 7:15, having been told only that her parents needed to discuss an important family matter with her. She entered the room with her usual poise, though Helena noticed her glance curiously at Colonel Winters's presence. "Please, sit down," Charles said, gesturing to the sofa facing the fireplace. Isabella took her seat gracefully, folding her hands in her lap. "This seems quite formal. Is everything all right?" Helena moved to sit beside her daughter, for what might be the last time she could think of Isabella in those terms, while Charles remained standing near the fireplace. The weight of the moment seemed to press down on all of them, and Helena could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. "Isabella," Charles began, his voice steady but strained. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe about yourself and your place in this family. I need you to know, before I say anything else, that Helena and I love you more than life itself. You are our daughter in every way that matters, regardless of the biological facts I'm about to reveal." Helena watched as Isabella's expression shifted from mild curiosity to growing alarm. The princess had always been perceptive, and Charles's preamble clearly indicated that whatever was coming would be devastating.
"Charles," Isabella said carefully, "you're frightening me."
"What biological facts?" Charles took a deep breath, drawing on 30 years of experience delivering difficult news to the nation. 3 days ago, Helena discovered documents in your private study that reveal the truth about your parentage. Isabella, I am not your biological father. The silence that followed was absolute. Helena could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece, the distant sound of traffic beyond the palace walls, even her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Isabella sat perfectly still, her face draining of all color as the implications of Charles's words began to sink in. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What did you say?" Helena reached for Isabella's hand, but the princess pulled away instinctively. "Isabella, darling, we have DNA evidence that confirms—" "No," Isabella interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "No, this is impossible. I'm your daughter. I have always been your daughter. This is some kind of mistake." Charles moved closer, his expression filled with anguish. "Isabella, I wish more than anything that it were a mistake. But the evidence is irrefutable. Your biological father is Lord Marcus Ashworth, who served as royal equerry during your mother's marriage to me." Isabella stood abruptly, pacing toward the windows as she struggled to process this information. Helena could see her brilliant mind working through the implications, and she dreaded the moment when Isabella would fully understand what this revelation meant for her future. "If you're not my father," Isabella said slowly, still facing the windows, "then I'm not the legitimate heir to the throne." The simple statement hung in the air like a death sentence. In those few words, Isabella had grasped the full magnitude of what she had just learned. Not only had she lost her father, but she had potentially lost her crown, her purpose, and her entire identity as well. Eleanor rose and moved toward her daughter, desperate to provide comfort. "Isabella, please look at me. This doesn't change who you are or how much we love you." Isabella turned from the window, and Helena was heartbroken to see tears streaming down her face. But behind the tears, Helena could see something else, anger, beginning to build and grow. "Doesn't change who I am?" Isabella's voice was rising. "Helena, this changes everything about who I am. My entire life has been preparation for a role I may not be entitled to hold. Every decision I've made, every sacrifice I've accepted, every relationship I've forgone, all of it was based on a lie." Charles stepped forward. "Isabella, no one intended for this to be a deception. Your grandfather made the decision to conceal this information to protect you and the stability of the kingdom." To protect the kingdom? Isabella's anger was now fully evident. Or to protect his own reputation and the reputation of his son. "How long have you known the truth?" Helena felt compelled to answer. "We've known for 4 days. We discovered the evidence on Monday, confirmed it with DNA testing, and consulted with legal experts before deciding to tell you." 4 days, Isabella repeated, her voice hollow. "You've known for 4 days that my entire life is built on a foundation of lies, and you waited 4 days to tell me." The accusation stung, but Helena understood Isabella's anger. From the princess's perspective, even 4 days of continued deception must feel like a betrayal. "We needed time to understand the implications and determine the best way to handle the situation," Charles explained. "This isn't just about our family. It affects the stability of the entire kingdom." Isabella laughed bitterly. "The stability of the kingdom. Of course, God forbid the inconvenient truth about my parentage should disrupt the precious institution of monarchy." Colonel Winters, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Your Highness, if I may, there are still important decisions to be made about how this information will be handled going forward." Isabella turned her furious gaze on the colonel. "And what decisions are those? Whether to continue the lie for the good of the kingdom, whether to find some way to quietly remove me from the succession without creating a scandal?" Helena felt her heart breaking at the pain and cynicism in Isabella's voice. "Isabella, please don't think like that. We're a family and we'll face this together." "Are we a family?" Isabella asked, her voice cutting through Helena like a knife. "Because it seems to me that I've just learned I'm not actually related to either of you. I'm the bastard daughter of a royal equerry and a queen who's been dead for 19 years. The cruel assessment of her situation was accurate but devastating to hear spoken aloud. Helena wanted desperately to comfort Isabella, to find words that would somehow make this situation bearable. But she was beginning to realize that there might not be any such words. Charles attempted to regain control of the conversation. "Isabella, regardless of your biological parentage, you are still our daughter. You've been raised as a member of this family and you've dedicated your life to serving this kingdom. That hasn't changed." "Everything has changed," Isabella replied, her voice now eerily calm. "The question is, what happens now? Do I abdicate quietly and disappear? Do I continue pretending to be something I'm not? Or do we tell the world the truth and watch the monarchy collapse under the weight of this scandal?" The 3 options Isabella had outlined represented the nightmare scenarios that Helena and Charles had been contemplating for 4 days. Each path led to heartbreak, either for Isabella personally or for the institution they had all devoted their lives to serving. Helena made one final attempt to reach her daughter. "Isabella, you don't have to make any decisions tonight. This is overwhelming for all of us. We should take time to—" "Time to what?" Isabella interrupted. "Time to find a way to make this go away? Time to convince me that continuing this charade is in everyone's best interest?" Isabella moved toward the door, then turned back to face the 3 people who had shaped her entire life. I need time alone to think about this. Don't follow me, don't send servants to check on me, and don't make any decisions about my future without consulting me first. As Isabella reached for the door handle, Charles called out to her, Isabella, wait! There's something else you need to know. Lord Ashworth is still alive. Isabella's hand froze on the door handle.
After a moment, she turned back toward her father, the man she could no longer think of as her father, with an expression that Helena couldn't quite read.
You mean my real father is still alive? Isabella corrected quietly.
And where exactly has my real father been for the past 29 years while I've been living this lie? Charles's voice was gentle. Living quietly in the Lake District. As far as we can determine, he has no idea that you're his daughter. Isabella absorbed this information with the same devastating calm she had shown throughout the conversation. Well then, she said finally, I suppose I have more than one life-changing conversation ahead of me. She left the room without another word, leaving Helena, Charles, and Colonel Winters to contemplate the wreckage of everything they had tried to protect. In the space of 30 minutes, their family had been fundamentally altered, and the future of the Valdorian monarchy had been thrown into question. Helena sank onto the sofa, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back to flow freely. Charles moved to sit beside her, and for the first time in 4 days they comforted each other as they faced the uncertain and potentially devastating future that lay ahead. The grandfather clock in the palace hallway chimed midnight as Princess Isabella sat in her private chambers, surrounded by the fragments of her shattered world. She had dismissed her lady-in-waiting hours ago, wanting complete solitude to process the devastating revelation that had upended her entire existence. The fire in her sitting room had died to glowing embers, casting dancing shadows across the portraits of royal ancestors who were no longer her ancestors, the family crests that no longer represented her heritage, and the ceremonial objects that symbolized a birthright she had never actually possessed. Isabella had spent the past 5 hours cycling through every emotion imaginable: shock, denial, anger, grief, and a bone-deep sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. She had been raised to believe that truth, honor, and duty were the cornerstones of royal life. Yet her entire existence had been built on the most fundamental deception possible. The irony was not lost on her that the people who had taught her these values had been lying to her every single day of her 29 years. The immediate questions were overwhelming. Should she contact Lord Ashworth immediately or take time to process her emotions first? How could she face her royal duties knowing that she had no legitimate claim to perform them? What would happen to the diplomatic agreements she had negotiated if her authority was retroactively questioned? And, most painful of all, how could she ever trust Charles and Helena again when they had built their relationship on such a massive deception? As dawn broke over the palace grounds, Isabella made her first decision. She would meet her biological father before making any choices about her future. Whatever else happened, she deserved to know the man whose genetic legacy she carried, and he deserved to know that he had a daughter who had grown up believing she was someone else entirely. At precisely 8 a.m., Isabella summoned Colonel Winters to her chambers. She had always respected the head of palace security for his discretion and professionalism, and she needed someone she could trust to arrange the meeting with Lord Ashworth without alerting the media or creating a security risk. Your Highness, Colonel Winters said as he entered her sitting room, his expression carefully neutral, despite the obvious signs that Isabella had not slept. Colonel, I need you to arrange for me to meet with Lord Ashworth as soon as possible, Isabella said without preamble. Completely privately, with no advance warning to him about the nature of my visit. Can this be done? Colonel Winters nodded immediately. Of course, Your Highness. Lord Ashworth lives alone in a cottage near Windermere. I can arrange for a private helicopter to transport you there this afternoon if you wish. Isabella felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of meeting her biological father so soon, but she knew that delaying would only make the encounter more difficult. That would be acceptable. Please make the arrangements. And, Colonel, no one else is to know about this meeting. Not the king, not the queen consort, no one. Understood, Your Highness, Colonel Winters replied. Will you be traveling alone? Isabella considered the question. Protocol demanded that she travel with at least a minimal security detail, but she wanted this meeting to be as normal and private as possible. Just yourself and one driver. No advanced security sweep, no formal protocols. I want to arrive as quietly as possible. As Colonel Winters departed to make the arrangements, Isabella began the emotionally exhausting task of preparing to meet the father she had never known existed. She chose simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and a wool coat, wanting to appear as much like a normal person as possible rather than a princess whose legitimacy was now in question. The helicopter journey to the Lake District took 2 hours, giving Isabella time to rehearse various approaches to introducing herself to Lord Ashworth.
How did one begin such a conversation?
Hello, I'm the daughter you never knew you had, and I've just learned that my entire life has been a lie? The absurdity of the situation would have been amusing if it weren't so devastating. Lord Marcus Ashworth's cottage was exactly what Isabella had expected. A charming stone building surrounded by carefully maintained gardens, with a view of Lake Windermere that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting that the 73-year-old former royal equerry was at home. Isabella approached the front door with trembling hands, her heart pounding so hard that she wondered if Colonel Winters could hear it from his position by the garden gate. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was about to do. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a tall, elderly man with silver hair and surprisingly familiar blue eyes. Eyes that Isabella realized with a shock were exactly like her own. Lord Ashworth was clearly startled to find a visitor at his door, and his expression grew even more confused as he studied Isabella's face. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Isabella began, her voice not quite steady. "I'm Princess Isabella, and I believe we need to discuss something very important." Lord Ashworth's face went pale as he stared at her, and Isabella could see recognition dawning in his eyes. Not recognition of her identity as a princess, but recognition of features that must have reminded him of someone from his past. "Good God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You look exactly like Margaret." The mention of her mother's name confirmed what Isabella had already suspected. Lord Ashworth had been in love with Queen Margaret, and their affair had been more than a casual indiscretion. The pain in his voice suggested that his feelings for her mother had been genuine and long-lasting. "May I come in?" Isabella asked gently. "I have something to tell you that will be quite shocking." Lord Ashworth stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing for Isabella to enter his small but comfortable sitting room. The cottage was filled with mementos from his years of royal service, photographs of state occasions, awards and commendations, and books about royal history and protocol. What Isabella didn't see were any photographs or mementos that might suggest a family of his own. "You never married," Isabella observed as she settled into an armchair by the fireplace. Lord Ashworth shook his head, still staring at her with a mixture of wonder and dawning comprehension. "Never found anyone who... That is, I never met anyone who..." He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Anyone who could compare to my mother," Isabella finished gently. Lord Ashworth's eyes filled with tears. "Princess, I don't know why you've come here or what you think you know about my past, but I want you to understand that I never meant any disrespect to the royal family. What happened between your mother and myself was—" "You're my father," Isabella interrupted, her voice cutting through his stammered explanation. "I learned 4 days ago that King Charles is not my biological father." "You are." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Ashworth stared at Isabella as if she had spoken in a foreign language, his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and finally a desperate hope that he seemed afraid to acknowledge. "That's impossible," he whispered finally. "I would have known. Margaret would have told me." Isabella reached into her purse and withdrew copies of the DNA test results that Dr. Fryer Hartwell had provided. "The evidence is irrefutable. King Edmund knew the truth and chose to conceal it. My mother died without ever telling you that you had a daughter." Lord Ashworth accepted the documents with shaking hands, though Isabella doubted he was actually reading them. The scientific terminology would have been meaningless to him anyway. What mattered was the devastating truth that his brief affair with Queen Margaret had resulted in a child he had never known existed. 29 years, he said finally, his voice breaking. "I'd had a daughter for 29 years, and I never knew." Isabella felt tears beginning to flow down her own cheeks.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that you were denied the chance to know me as a child, and that I was denied the chance to know my real father." Lord Ashworth looked up at her sharply. "Princess, whatever the biological facts might be, King Charles has been your father in every way that matters. He raised you, loved you, prepared you for your role as future queen. I may have contributed genetic material, but he's your real father." The generosity of his response touched Isabella deeply, but it also highlighted the impossible complexity of her situation. "The problem is that my role as future queen is based entirely on my supposed bloodline connection to the royal family. If I'm not Charles's biological daughter, I may not be entitled to inherit the throne." Lord Ashworth's expression grew grave as he began to understand the full implications of Isabella's revelation. My God, this isn't just about family relationships. It's about the future of the monarchy itself. Isabella nodded, grateful that he understood the magnitude of the situation without requiring extensive explanation. "I don't know what to do. If I continue in my role as heir, I'm perpetuating a deception that undermines the very legitimacy of the crown. If I reveal the truth, I destroy not only my own life but potentially the stability of the entire kingdom." Lord Ashworth rose from his chair and moved to the window overlooking the lake, his posture reflecting the weight of this impossible dilemma. "Princess, may I ask why you chose to tell me the truth? You could have simply accepted this knowledge privately and continued with your royal duties." Isabella considered the question carefully. "Because you deserve to know that you have a daughter, and because I needed to meet the man who gave me half of my genetic heritage. Also, if I'm going to make decisions about my future, I want to make them with complete knowledge of who I really am." Lord Ashworth turned back to face her, and Isabella was struck by how much his features resembled her own. The shape of his nose, the line of his jaw, even his mannerisms, all clearly recognizable as her own genetic inheritance. "What do you want from me?" he asked gently. Isabella had been dreading this question because she wasn't sure she knew the answer. "I want to get to know you. I want to understand who you are, what your life has been like, what kind of man my biological father is. Beyond that, I honestly don't know." They spent the next 3 hours in conversation that ranged from awkward to heartbreaking to surprisingly natural. Lord Ashworth told Isabella about his childhood in Yorkshire, his military service before joining the royal household, and his 30-year career serving 3 generations of monarchs. He spoke carefully but lovingly about his relationship with Queen Margaret, describing a woman who was passionate, impulsive, and deeply unhappy in her marriage, despite her public devotion to royal duty. "Your mother was extraordinary," he told Isabella. "She had an intelligence and vitality that lit up every room she entered, but she was also trapped by the constraints of royal life in ways that would be hard for someone your age to understand. The monarchy was much more rigid 30 years ago." Isabella found herself hungry for these details about her mother, whom she had idealized based on official portraits and formal biographies. Learning that Queen Margaret had been capable of genuine passion and even rebellion made her seem more human and relatable. "Do you regret your relationship with her?" Isabella asked. Lord Ashworth was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that it ended the way it did, with her death and my departure from royal service. I regret that she died feeling trapped and unhappy, but I can't regret loving her, especially knowing now that our love created you." As afternoon turned to evening, Isabella realized that she needed to return to the palace to face the consequences of her absence. Charles and Helena would be worried, and she would need to brief them on her conversation with Lord Ashworth before making any decisions about her future. "Will you stay in contact with me?" she asked as she prepared to leave. Lord Ashworth's face lit up with the first genuine smile she had seen from him all day. "Princess, nothing would make me happier than getting to know my daughter. But I want you to understand that I make no claims on your life or your future. Whatever decisions you make about your role as heir to the throne, I'll support completely." The helicopter journey back to Ravenshire Palace gave Isabella time to process her extraordinary day. Meeting Lord Ashworth had answered some questions while raising many others, but one thing had become clear. She now had a biological father who loved her without expectations or demands, and who was willing to let her make her own choices about how to handle their relationship. Isabella landed at the palace just as the evening news was beginning.
and she was relieved to see that her absence had apparently gone unnoticed by the media. Colonel Winters escorted her back to her chambers, where she found a note from Helena requesting an urgent meeting whenever Isabella felt ready to talk. Instead of responding to Helena's note immediately, Isabella sat down at her writing desk and began composing a letter that would change everything. She wrote steadily for 2 hours, crafting the most important document of her life, a formal statement to be delivered to Parliament announcing her decision about the succession. When she finished writing, Isabella sealed the letter and placed it in her personal safe. Tomorrow, she would meet with Charles and Helena one final time before delivering her decision to the world. Tonight, she would say goodbye to Princess Isabella Voldoria, heir to the throne of Voldoria, and prepare to become simply Isabella Ashworth, a woman who had finally learned the truth about herself and was ready to live an authentic life, regardless of the cost. The choice she had made would shock the kingdom, devastate the monarchy, and disappoint millions of people who believed in her fitness to rule. But for the first time in her 29 years, Isabella was making a decision based on truth, rather than duty, and she felt a sense of peace that she had never experienced as a princess, living a lie. As she prepared for bed, Isabella looked one last time at the royal portraits that lined her chambers, the faces of kings and queens who shared no genetic connection to her, the symbols of an heritage that had never truly been hers. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of building a new life based on reality rather than carefully maintained fiction. And while that future was uncertain and frightening, it was finally authentically her own.